we spend a lot of time doing focus groups, which I appreciate can feel a little bit 80s, but is incredibly helpful to actually just ask your clients once in a while, what did you think of this?
Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Well, if you would like to get involved with That's What I Call Marketing, you can check out our 2025 sponsorship kit. It is available on our website, that'swhaticallmarketing.com/sponsor. We would love to chat to you about partnership opportunities. We've had so many great partners in 2024. Really grateful to all of them for getting involved with That's What I Call Marketing. So if you would like to do the same in an incredible community of marketers, just get in touch. And of course, if you are enjoying episodes of That's What I Call Marketing and can do a small favor, and that is to rate or review the episode wherever you are listening or watching, it really helps us grow and continue to grow this incredible community of engaged marketers just like you. So really appreciate if you can take those few seconds and give us a rating and review. And of course, if they're 5 stars, all the better. Well, on to today's episode, and I am joined by Sarah Higgins. Now, Sarah has over 25 years experience in marketing communications, both agency and in-house. She's a regular speaker at industry events and symposiums, including serving on the inaugural B2B Lines jury in Cannes. She is currently the managing director at State Street Global Advisors, where she runs global media relations in EMEA and APAC, marketing the firm's intermediary franchise. This year, Sarah was president and just recently president of the Creative B2B Awards at Eurobest. And today's episode, we are talking about, yes, one of my passion points, B2B marketing. Understanding how Sarah has approached B2B marketing in her career, understanding then how she has seen and the themes that have come through in her jury work with both Cannes Line and Eurobest, the themes that she is seeing and advice she has for you as a marketer if you are entering awards, and some really great advice actually. So make sure you stay tuned for that wonderful advice from Sarah in today's episode. So without any further ado, let's get into a topic that I absolutely love with the brilliant Sarah Higgins.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
Sarah, thanks a million for joining me on That's What I Call Marketing. Great to see you.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me.
Well, listen, we've so much to cover, and it is one of my kind of passion topics. I love talking about B2B marketing. But before we kind of get into all that, maybe just a quick introduction for people who don't know who you are. Tell me a bit about your origin story.
Sure, of course. So my name's Sarah Higgins. I'm responsible for marketing for the ETF business at State Street Global Advisors in Europe and Asia Pacific. So what that means day to day is looking after all of our campaigning that's outside of the Americas region. And that's everything from digital to online to B2B campaigning for specific markets to pan-European campaigns as well. I've been with that organization now for just over 7 years.
Okay, wow.
Spent my whole life in B2B and always in financial services. So I'm quite deep in that particular vertical.
Being a marketer in that space, is hard, right? Because there's all these things you have to understand, have to figure out. There's lots of regulation and compliance that you have to follow. So then how do you think of approaching your marketing activities? So how do you kind of think about the approach to marketing that you can make it, I guess, at least somewhat engaging and enjoyable within those limitations?
So I think it depends where you're targeting across investor segments. So if you start at the most sophisticated end of the scale, so it might be a family office, it might be a big private bank. So these investors who are going to be at least as qualified as some of the top investors in our own organization who do this for a living, then often it's really about customer experience at that point. And so access is not a problem for those huge investors. They already either run money themselves or are responsible for access to a huge capital pool. But you might be able to give them access to, I don't know, world speakers, for example, to really think about, okay, what's the macroeconomic impact of these political changes? We've seen a lot of political change over the course of the year. That's a risk that might be reflected in the portfolio. So those tend to be one to few campaigns. And we've seen a lot of that in marketing over the last couple of years, right? You have the one to many, there's a mass broadcast marketing, and then you have campaigns that are really, if they hit 5, 10, 15 people and they have one MQL,
Yeah.
they're going to be delighted because
Yeah.
that's got huge, huge value. So that's a really targeted type of campaign that you might run around really getting in front of just a very small but very influential cohort of decision makers. At the other end of the scale, there's still a lot of brand building. So in financial
Okay.
services, you might have some B2B market, but markets where you can target retail audiences, there's an absolute cornucopia of different companies that they can buy from. And so a lot of that is about what's your brand story, why are you different, why are you either uh, a more cost-effective, perhaps,
Hmm.
solution, maybe you're more transparent, maybe you have better quality of investment intellect inside the product. But a lot of that is really about an industry that can feel really quite commoditized from the outside. So how do you stand out and create some white space in a very, very crowded and quite well financed market?
Yeah. And so how then do you think about your like set of marketing activities? Because again, you've talked there about kind of two very different sides of the scale, and I love those. I kind of love that opportunity actually of the kind
You
of the
betcha.
almost the white glove type marketing, right? Because you're going after some like really specific people, and you can do some really wonderful things that maybe like the world more broadly won't see, but they're
Yeah.
incredibly impactful. But then, as you say, you kind of have that broader brand building. So, how do you kind of approach the mix and kind of the set of activities that you're responsible for in across a diverse set of markets, which we need to talk about as well?
Yes. So there's, if we start at the kind of top level, the top down piece, I think the most important element is really understanding what the commercial targets are of your sales and distribution team. So in a perfect world, you would have a 3 to 5 year time horizon, because as we know in marketing, what only when we are sick of hearing the message is it really landing in the marketplace. So I say to people, it's got to be 2 years. Like let
Yeah.
us do something for 2 years at a minimum. So ideally, you've got a 3 to 5 year time frame in partnership with your distribution partners. And then you've got some idea from your market research as to where you think that the pent up demand is or the potential market is for your products that you either can build or that you know it's there, but that market hasn't been able to find the right fit for what they're
Yeah.
looking for. And that will then inform really which marketing tactics you put into place, because then you'll know, okay, these people are just making it up. There
Yeah.
is a cohort of investors. There's probably 250 of them are based in Luxembourg. So we're just going to focus on the Luxembourg market for now, and that would be our campaign. And then you look at, okay, of those 250 investors, this is what we know about their characteristics. This is what the personas tell us about where they hang out, what hobbies they have, where their kids go to school, whatever it may be that we can,
Yeah.
give us an access route to those new audiences, and then build a traditional funnel from there. But it does take quite a lot of good quality data. One of the things when we talk about what builds a good campaign is B2B really is about knowing your customer. And that's
Right.
about the kernel of any campaign being really, really focused on what is your data, what is your insight that is really authentic and relevant to your organization, and has some longevity to it. Again,
Yeah.
ideally, you can have some pivots. And then you can build a campaign. The campaign is really a mirror to the data set, really. And
Yeah.
it's clever and imaginative ways of reaching that audience in a way they haven't been reached potentially before, or that really, really resonates with whatever challenge they're trying to navigate. Um, where you don't have that insight at the beginning of a campaign, then it is of course trickier, because you're then having to kind of speculate. Okay, let's it becomes more like, okay, right, we're having to sort of intuit a little bit where we think the demand is, and then be much more nimble during the campaign to
Right.
really look at, okay, what's working and what's not, and that's where performance attribution becomes much more important, because if you don't start with really good market research and understanding where the demand is, and you're going to kind of have I hate to call a marketing led campaign, which infers the one that looks really pretty but doesn't have a lot of data behind it, you're of course going to be required to justify your spend and still do campaign tracking, which you should
Yeah.
be held accountable. But that means your in market, in real time reporting needs to be really sharp, because then you can actually stop and say, okay, wait a minute, we thought there was going to be a really great response from intermediaries in the Netherlands, but actually they're really not receptive to this message. But we are getting great pickup in Quidges in Italy. So we're going to
Right.
pivot our spend there, and we're going to take our tactics into the different market,
Okay.
and be much more dynamic than you might be for a campaign that has better data up front.
Okay, really, that's so interesting to have those you have those the different kind of sides of the coin there, and you talked there about different markets, and I'm fascinated. I was really lucky. I had a role that was responsible for probably some of the markets that you look after, European, Asia Pacific as well, and like there's such differences in the markets from lots of different ways. Like obviously culture, language, that's one. The competitive set in the market can be incredibly different. How people do business can be different. So I'd love to. How do you approach that? Because obviously, then the goal is to have more scale and more things that are scalable across markets. So how have you kind of managed those differences with that kind of scale challenge?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point, and it's a perennial challenge. What we tend to do is a bit of a hybrid approach at the moment in my organization. So we have, when we're allocating budgets, for example, we'll tend to have approximately 50% that's dedicated to specific market campaigns. So going directly into that country and very much reflecting the individual tastes and preferences of investors, in my case, in that market. Then we will have about another 50% of the budget that we'll use for central campaigns, which go out all across Europe. So they will be, the idea is to have, global consistency, but local relevance at
Right.
all
Yeah.
times. And it's a little bit of a balancing act, as you rightly point out. So some campaigns will be running right across a region, be that Asia Pacific or EMEA. And they will probably be kind of brand level type of campaigns, or for us, kind of asset class level. So something that's got relevance to quite a lot of your suite overall, but
Yeah.
may not dig down into quite as much of the detail of the USPs that you think would be relevant to particular markets. Local language delivery is a huge part of what we do. Of course, every investor, regardless of their aptitude in English, would much prefer to have
Yeah.
information in local language. So that takes up a lot of our time, and making sure that when we then do launch global or European campaigns, if we have a value proposition, that it really resonates in each of those markets. And if it doesn't, that we can tweak accordingly. But I do think a lot of attention to detail is really important as well, because as you know, like the nuance can get really, really complex really fast.
Yeah.
So, um, when we look at Italy, for example, we find that's a very brand driven marketplace. And while we have a lot of work on our IP and a lot of work on the investment ideas we can bring to clients, a lot of the time we spend is also really understanding that brand sells in that marketplace. And we really need to be thoughtful about how we position what our brand proposition is, as well as our product proposition. But equally tactically, to your point, so social media is a huge opportunity in Asia Pacific, but the
Yeah.
kind of outlets that we use typically in Europe don't particularly resonate outside of
Okay.
Europe, and having to think about different avenues to market. And that can be a bit of an education process in-house when you're selling in. Why are you using, we know this name. Why are you going why are you going that way and not this way?
Yeah.
So it's just really not a relevant marketplace for someone in Hong Kong or someone in Singapore right now.
Yeah.
It's something that we use a lot in Europe, or we use a lot in the US, or Anglophone countries writ large, but really may not be culturally that relevant
Yeah.
to those marketplaces. So from strategy to tactics, there's quite a lot of horse trading that kind of has to go on in the background to make sure that you deliver something that really makes sense to your local market, but doesn't fragment you so much
Yeah.
that your global messaging becomes piecemeal.
Yeah. It's such a challenge, right? For so many global brands, and even like brands with global ambitions, I think have to start thinking about it, and the B2B space, it's such a huge opportunity in terms of kind of, the revenue potential is so much bigger than B2C. And I think we forget that. But brands starting out in B2B underestimate that challenge until they start getting into it, and they don't realize how nuanced it can be, and how you have to kind of really, really think about it. The plug and play doesn't really work. I think it gets you so far. I'd be really interested. Has there been anything that's really surprised you that you were like, oh God, we just did not expect that to not work in this market, or to really take off in this market? Because I certainly had those experiences as well.
I think your point about local customization is really important. And some of the things that we found is, so we spend a lot of time doing focus groups, which I appreciate is
Right.
can feel a little bit 80s, but is incredibly helpful to actually just ask your clients once in a while, what did
Yeah.
you think of this?
Yeah.
Rather than assuming that
I love that. Feeling a bit
takes a
80s.
while. It's not about 80s, but stick something across the table. It can be brutal, the process. So that's also why I like it, is that I've had campaigns up, gone into a room and I've, been kind of looking forward to hearing people say it's wonderful and just have it absolutely trashed. But you need that before
Yeah.
you, better then than when you go out to market.
Yeah.
Um, and certainly at a previous organization, we'd done some messaging and it was all about we're a pioneer in the industry and this is our however many years of credentials. And people just didn't care how long we've been doing business. They didn't care. They thought the innovation thing was made up. They thought they couldn't care less how long we've been in business in the past, how many offices we had, how many, they honestly couldn't care less. So that was good. That was kind of humbling, but important
Yeah.
to get that feedback. We recently ran a focus group on our Japanese website to get some feedback for how that was perceived. And it got some sort of lukewarm feedback, but
Right.
essentially it was distilled down into, for a foreign website that's been translated, it's quite good.
Okay.
And it was like, oh, wow, it's really obvious then. Okay, so it was really obvious that, that some of that clunkiness, as we know, that can happen in
Yeah.
translation, that we had translated. So sort of you think that was a bit of a tick in the box, and it got us some of the way,
Interesting.
but it was still very clear that it hadn't been written by a native speaker in the first iteration, and it was all translated out of English is the first language. And so there's some clunkiness
Yeah.
that remains in the way that website is articulated. So that was really good information for us in terms of how, we tend, because of compliance, we tend to write everything in English, have it complied, then translate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But of course, we're losing fluidity all the time. So that was interesting to know. Another Japan insight in terms of, something a campaign you thought was going to work really well, but didn't land in reality. So we had a campaign that we ran for a client, which was about performance. And it was about kind of where you might find unexpected good performance where you didn't think it
Right.
would exist, right? So we had lots of kind of deliberately sort of jarring analogies that were supposed to kind of provoke this conversation about where performance lies. And one was affectionately called DJ Granny, and it was a campaign where, you have this kind of Ibiza style club backdrop, and the older lady comes up and she mixes on the decks, and it's about how everyone can perform in different circumstances, and it may surprise you where performance lies. But before we launched it in Japan, we just wanted to run it through a focus group, 80 style, and
Right.
ask some clients, what do you think of it? And they said, well, what is she doing? And we're like, she's DJing. And they said, what's a DJ? And we're like, oh,
Oh.
wow, this the cohort that it's just not part of their culture. DJing isn't part of the culture. And for this particular investor cohort, they don't just not like the campaign. They have no idea what the lady's doing. Like, this is just not even it's just not gonna land at all. It's gonna be a catastrophic waste of cash. I think we spend a lot of time in a creative industry thinking, is it innovative enough? Is it creative enough?
Yeah.
Is it
Yes. Yeah.
new? Does it disrupt? Is it groundbreaking? Because that's what, as a creative, you're taught to sort of look for and
Yeah.
appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but this campaign just wasn't going to work we ran it elsewhere, but it wasn't going to work for Japan. So um, it can be invaluable to, obvious though it sounds, just to ask your customers, what do you think?
That is amazing. And it is like, it's such a, yeah, just the differences in all the markets. And there's wonderful similarities, but there's so many nuanced differences. Like I remember doing stuff in India, and just even how people go and find and look for jobs, when I was working for a job site, was really different. And then in Brazil, job sites, like job seekers pay to be on job sites. Like, do you know what I mean?
Oh,
And all these
wow.
nuanced
Okay.
different. Yeah, you're like, wow,
Right.
really? And how you lean into that. I think you bring up an interesting point there. B2B marketing is an incredible space to be in. And I think it's kind of having its moment, which is great, because we're getting really talented marketers now actually looking at B2B marketing and going, like, it isn't the poor relation of marketing like it was once seen, right? And I can't quite put my finger on what's happened to make that happen, but it's good, right? So we're getting really good people who want to be part of, doing great marketing in B2B. But at times then, where B2B marketing can be seen as quite boring, because the opportunities to do something that's kind of, it's like fame-led strategy and creativity is, it can be limited or limiting. But is that an excuse for B2B marketing not to be better?
It's funny, so we had these conversations for some years now, and there's always a kind of, even if you go into a judging them, what are you judging? I'm judging B2B, and oh, that's lovely.
Like the,
That's lost the reputation, as being the kind of poor relation that's kind of allowed into the room, but might do something awful. It's not left unchecked. I think, look, B2B's come on a huge stride
Mm,
since I've joined the industry for sure. And I think that the talent in the industry has also changed a lot too, right? We want to be part of a destination team. We want to be doing award-winning work. And definitely B2B has lagged. And I think that for financial services, in terms of the industry that I know best, has suffered a little bit from being very well funded and very conservative.
yeah.
So we talk a lot about what's easier to sell in-house, and it is a really safe idea.
Yeah.
And the funding is while we will always feel underfunded versus other industries, the appetite for risk is absolutely zero, really, a lot of the time. So trying to get bolder and more courageous work signed off is really, really tricky. And I think
Yeah.
you can helicopter that up a little bit and think about, a lot of the purpose-driven work that we see, where if you're talking about charities specifically or not-for-profits, while the budgets might be lower, the sign-off process arguably is potentially a little bit easier
Yeah.
to route, because you're looking at organizations that can kind of self-sign off effectively, and already they're very wedded to their approach, and they naturally have to have quite a kind of disruptive approach to their work at the best of times. Whereas if you're in a big organization, you have a larger budget, while you might be better resourced financially and in terms of the team you have on hand, the organization you're working in is likely to be quite small c conservative culturally anyway. And risk taking is generally viewed as irresponsible.
Right. Yeah.
So trying to say, okay, even in the marketing zone, it's worth us taking some risk. And if we don't, we can end up spending a lot of money to not move the dial at all. That can take quite a lot of time. So I think B2B is catching up. The difference in the work, even since I was on the first B2B jury at Cannes in 2022, the breadth of countries that are engaging in incredible B2B, the courage and the boldness
Right.
and the creativity is different.
Well, that's really great. It's great to hear the progress, and because you've seen it, right? You've just been judging for the Eurobest awards as well. So I'd love to hear a bit about kind
Exactly.
of what you've seen coming through there and themes that you've seen come through.
So, in terms of, so yes, absolutely. So Eurobest judging was taking place last week, and we had a little bit of a pre-judging session as well, just to really familiarise ourselves with some of the work at home before going into the room. Um, and there were lots of interesting themes to draw out. Firstly, that I think in terms of the spread of interest, so we had work from 11 countries came in. So
Okay.
there was a real kind of, there were isolated pockets in Europe where B2B is really kind of getting into its stride. There was a very much more um, broader spread of applications
Okay.
than I've seen before, which was
Great.
really exciting. And the metals that we awarded, without giving anything away, were across 4 countries. So there was definitely,
Okay.
real diversity there. But the awards are really about, still about creativity, right? So looking about game-changing creativity that can stand up to B2C. One
Yeah.
of the things I talked about with my jury when we were trying to get prepared for going into judge was, for me, what is my North Star? And for me, it was like, I don't want it to be good for B2B. I want it to be just good, and I
Okay.
want to be
Like that.
looking at that work and feeling that good sense of professional envy of, I wish I'd done that.
Oh,
That
love
was,
that.
that
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
that's really good. That's really clever. Like, I wish I thought of that. And I love the way they packaged that.
Okay.
So there was quite a lot more playfulness in this cohort of work. And typically we're quite serious in B2B, and it tends to be, quite kind of, we can be a bit mechanical.
Yes.
Sometimes.
You are listening to That's What I Call Marketing.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.
Yeah.
In the way that
Definitely.
it comes across. So there was a lot of humor, there was a lot of lightheartedness, which you don't tend to see, and that confidence to be charming and to be maybe even a little bit quirky is
that.
not something that we tend to do that much in B2B. And I enjoyed that a lot. And I also, you could see aspects of B2C techniques being deployed really well in B2B.
Yeah.
And in a similar vein, there was way better storytelling, I think, across a lot of the
Okay.
campaigns at high levels. Either that the narrative was super compelling, or that there was a greater focus on impact. Why is this product what is this product doing that makes people's lives better? Whereas B2B, I think historically has been, speaking of being mechanical, has also been quite transactional. You're going
Yes.
to buy
Yeah.
this thing, you're going to get an X% change in this one vertical, and then off you go, you'll be happy. And
Yeah.
having a much kind of broader understanding of what impact really means lent greater richness to the storytelling.
Interesting, because like a lot of B2B marketing as well is inside out, right? It's like we have all these things we need to say about this product,
Yes.
and we have to try
Yes.
get that out into the world. And so even that kind of storytelling impact, playfulness, things that you've talked about, even if that becomes your starting point, maybe over all the features and benefits and all the things that you have to get out into the world, you start to then think differently about how you might create work that's going to be more enjoyed.
Absolutely. I think that B2B has a tendency in the past to have this kind of, as you say, a torrent of information.
Yeah.
It's just a sort of a barrage you with information about this product or this service, and then you're going to go away knowing everything about it, and that would be a win. And of course, that can lead to a kind of overload and just a sort of information dump type of approach to marketing,
Yeah.
which of course means people remember nothing rather than, anything. But another thing we saw coming through, which I really enjoyed, was Hagans campaigns, and that really, really pared back. And again, I know as a B2B marketer how hard it is to say, let's just focus on this one thing for this campaign. Let's not try and add the bells and the whistles. Let's really pare back an idea to its absolute essence.
Yeah.
And then execute it with that minimalist clarity, and be courageous enough to do that and not say, we'll add on one little extra thing, one little more thing, because that's kind of, or again, in-house, you tend to get pushed to,
yes,
but you haven't said this about it.
Yeah.
So that can work, but again, it takes courage. But when you have an idea that's really crisp and clear and clean, that can achieve incredible cut-through. So that was really awesome to see as well.
Big challenge, I think, for marketers in that B2B space is exactly what you've talked about there, which is, you use the marketer probably going to go, actually, no, I'm going to really just be more concise, clarity, all the things you just talked about there. And then you bring it to other people in the organization and they're like, well, we need to say this, this, and this. And then it's kind of like everyone starts adding on the bits. How have you kind of, I'm sure that's been something you've been challenged with through your career. How have you kind of approached that pushback? Because that's, I think, a hard thing, because not often, but there can be situations where there's very few marketing people in an organization that are sales or product led. There'd be more salespeople or product people, and the marketer might feel more pressure from a wider variety of people to make these changes. So how have you dealt with that pressure?
I think it's a perennial challenge, and particularly as you enter organizations that have quite a flat structure, their sign-off processes can be actually harder to navigate, because historically, again, going back to the 1970s approach to management, you just had one person who signed everything off, and they had their feet on the desk, and you walked in, you said, we're going to do this. That, yeah, I like it. No, I hate it. And you'd be done. Whereas now I can feel like we have this kind of cast of thousands type of approach where once you've collated the feedback from the 10, 15, 20 stakeholders who need to sign off, you've arbitraged out your message that you started with to such an extent that the campaign's almost unrecognizable from the original one that you presented. And half the time your stakeholders are commenting on each other's comments. It's not even your work in the first instance. It's like they don't like each other's comments on the things that you amended, and it can become this kind of super feedback that is kind of indigestible. I would not plan in a million years to have got the silver bullet for that challenge. But where you do have an opportunity is when you're going single market, because you can talk about cultural, local relevance for that particular product, and you've got a really tight target audience you've identified, and so you know them really well. And I think being able to demonstrate that can help advocate for a less is more type of approach. It is tricky, I think, with all aspects of marketing, because people buy a newspaper or own an iPad or have a phone, feel very familiar with the job that is marketing. But actually, really good marketing should be way more data driven than familiarization with the actual tactic, which tends to be you get to tactics really fast. And I think being able to hold the conversation at a more strategic level helps avoid but are you going to do a buy here, or am I going to see it turn up there?
Get into that kind of different level. It is kind of don't go in with the pictures first. Like, do you know what I mean?
Flip the
Because
pages.
that's the thing people react to. They're like, oh, I don't
Mm.
like the color. I don't like that shade of blue. You know what I mean? Because they're all blue. Uh,
There's something, yeah, exactly.
but also, I've found as well that, and I think it's probably like a thing you need to get to and build to, but is being really clear on what feedback you are looking for, and that's about asking the right questions, I think, and you have to figure that out in different organizations. I think, like, I remember before we would have sent work out to some of the markets, and we would ask them, a very broad question like, will this work in your market? And immediately what that did was people were looking for the things that might not be right,
Yes. Yes,
as
that's a good
opposed
point.
as opposed to kind of saying, like, flipping it and like, what do you love about this? Like, what's going to work? And then it just changes the whole mindset of somebody's. Even those things, I think, can be really kind of
Wow.
clever ways of trying to get the right feedback from people.
Yes, I totally agree. I think flipping the question makes a huge difference. Spent many years doing media relations and spent a lot of time saying, I'm looking for grammatical errors to be corrected in this.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I'm not asking for like your flaubert flourish. I often got flaubert flourish as well, but it can be tricky to guide the feedback to, especially when you've done a lot of research in the background to get to the point. But I do think I would challenge you a little bit on don't start with the pictures, because I think the problem when you withhold the picture, there's a sense that you are withholding. And it's like, we
Right.
haven't
Yeah.
seen the campaign yet, so I haven't got, no, I don't know what I think. And it can work both ways. If you hold back too long on just show the execution, you rapidly degenerate into, I don't like that word, or I don't like that
Yeah.
image, or whatever. I think if you've done lots and lots of really rich data gathering, then the best positioning is, look, it doesn't matter what I think, or with the greatest of respect, what any of the stakeholders in this room think. What
Mhm.
really matters is, does it work for our clients? And we know, because we've been speaking to our clients about what they want to hear about from us. So
Yeah.
while we may not feel like this is the pace we want to see us showing up,
Yeah.
we know that for the budget we have, the audience we're trying to reach, this is the approach, this is the creative that's going to really resonate with them.
Yeah.
Because otherwise your conversation's about my personal opinion. My
Oh,
subjective
yeah.
view on this
Yeah.
color is great. And while those views are completely valid, and obviously we operate in an age where everyone's view is valid, it's not actually everyone's view that's valid. It's the
Yeah.
target audience you're trying to reach, or it's the campaign objective you're trying to reach. That is your golden thread and your source of truth. And what individuals in the room feel, unless they are a target audience, may really not be that relevant at all.
Yeah.
But those conversations can get frustrating also, because, as you know, you can put months and months into bringing that deck together. And if you're back to the drawing board, but the campaign you presented was the best one, because you have looked at another
Yeah.
15 ways of doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
the one
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
is going to be the right one. It can be, a bit soul destroying. So I think just focusing on what is the data telling us, and what do our target audience think, over what do we in the room think,
Yes.
can be a helpful way of guiding a conversation.
Oh, yeah, look, 100% agree with that. And even having done it before, where you have a client quoted or something like in a deck, and you're kind of like, literally, this is what they said about this thing is brilliant, because like it does stop that conversation. I think, and you're right, the data has to tell the story, because the risk is, that because we want something to go live so much, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
we're like, I just want to get it through this room, get you all to say yes.
It's
Like,
could be a bit desperate as well.
yeah,
And
yeah,
of course, the emotion comes into that
yeah,
conversation. And
yeah,
even
yeah.
if the emotion is valid, it can discredit the way you present it a little bit. Because,
It-
going back to the judging room, there's moments where, rightly, you should have this response, by the way, but people are like, I just love this piece of work. And
yeah,
though, sometimes when you are presenting your own work, that you're communicating that, and you should have passion and conviction in your own work. But equally, that can come across a little bit as, you've just fallen in love with this idea, and you've lost track of where it needs to land in the marketplace. So
you kind of said back to the judging room. I'd love to go back in as well for a minute. And with the Eurobest Awards, submissions are like, there's a bit of an art form into award submissions, and so you've gone through, you've seen a lot now,
yes.
in the panels you've been on. Are there any things that kind of stand out to you, like, that marketers who are kind of tuning into this could take on board in terms of how to approach writing a great submission? Because I think it is an art.
So I totally agree. So I think that there's a couple of elements to consider whenever, and in a jury, we kind of you have big, wide-ranging conversations. Sometimes you need to try and bring everyone back into, okay, wait a minute, we still need to work out how we're gonna vote on this piece of work and what our ultimate collective opinion is gonna be. And often we would just go back to rereading the brief. And I know
Right.
that sounds stupid, but just making sure that you know, okay, what are your campaign objectives? What have they set out as the campaign objectives? It may not have achieved X, Y, and Z that we think it could have achieved, but if that wasn't the objective of the campaign in the first place, should we
Right.
really be focusing on it as part of our judging process? So looking back at what is the category supposed to be delivering for
Yeah.
us? So it's still going to need to be super creative, so see that in there. Yes, of course, there's effectiveness in terms of the promotion, products and services. So then when you're looking at putting together whatever data you have to corroborate the impact of your campaign, making sure that not only is it very readily understandable as to what that metric is, but why you chose that metric is helpful to know.
Okay.
The criteria for Eurobest is long and short-term tactics, long-term brand building. So can you weave in metrics and narrative that speak to that? Connecting with customers, improving brand health metrics, again, incredibly subjective a lot of the time. And because it's B2B, like, can you show us ultimately driven growth?
Right.
So again, having some kind of business impact metric is really helpful too. Understanding why you chose, because we can't have all of us have a tsunami of metrics at the end of a campaign. And I think all of us will share the experience of having gone into a room with stakeholders, or in this case with a jury, and seeing people glaze over as you report back your metrics. And you think, wait a minute, this is the thing you told me to do to deliver ROI. I'm telling you all about my ROI now. And I can see that you're checking your phone and you've completely checked out of the conversation. So you know that the metrics you're delivering are not ones that really resonate with
Care.
people,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're not suddenly on the edge of their seat to hear more. They're completely zoning out. So knowing why that metric is important to you, why it's really credible, and why it is completely relevant to what you set out
Yeah.
to do in this campaign. It may seem obvious to us as marketers why that number's in there, but it's not necessarily going to
Yeah.
seem obvious even to other marketers who don't know your campaign objectives and maybe the cultural relevance of your market, whatever reason you've chosen that metric. In the same way that when we see clients and stakeholders and we see them, anything that's got a billion or a million or gazillion trillion at the end of it is always going to have people just question its credibility
Yeah.
again. So
Yeah.
again, having sure that, whatever you've got in there is substantiated as to why you chose it, as well as what the number is and how that number, even if you have like a link back, can be tried and tested. Obviously, for jurors, we're very lucky. We can ask the Eurobest team to go and check data that we don't necessarily have. But I
Yeah.
think it's a good discipline for all campaign reporting, really.
It's a great point. I think is kind of helping people understand the reason why that metric is important. Because again, I've judged things before, and you if you don't have that, you are left wondering, why did they not put something in about, like, a revenue growth? Do you know what I mean? And it just
Yes.
it leads to more questions. It's a brilliant, actually, award writing tip, I think, for anybody, is be really clear. It's not just on the metrics, but it's the why that's the metric that matters. Because, like,
Yes.
it can be different for lots of different reasons. I think for me as well, another thing with awards, the importance of awards. I think within a business, have you seen impact on some teams even that you've been in, where awards, like, you've won an award and that has helped the marketing team because they've won this really kind of prestigious award?
Yeah, I think there's absolutely no doubt that winning awards has huge impacts on perception and morale. So if we start with the team itself, you're putting heart and soul into your work.
Yeah.
And knowing that it's been recognized is hugely, hugely important. Now, that's, in-house on client side, right? So I think that that's massively important for the pre-existing team who've done the work, because there's nothing like third-party corroboration. And I probably work in one of the most skeptical industries imaginable. The idea that someone else thinks you're good is worth 25 times more than your own team telling you you're good. Like, every day of the week, that means more to your internal stakeholders, but it's also a way of you not having to go back and back yourself. That's not always a comfortable dialogue, because inevitably you feel like you're blowing your own trumpet. It's never going to have the same kind of credibility. I think for both agency and client side, you're trying to build the teams with the best talent that you can possibly gather from the market, and ability to demonstrate that you do award-winning work makes you more of a destination team. You won't always be able to offer the highest paying job to every person who'd love to join your team, but what you want to demonstrate is they're going to be able to do exciting work, and it's going to be recognized not just in their own organization but beyond. Then of course there is a commercial angle too, particularly elements of B2B. You touched on it earlier in our conversation, is that if you look at the commercial clout of a B2B buyer, not every day of the week, but it's going to have in Europe or particularly North America, or in fact all of the world, there'll be countries where the GDP is off the charts, and that filters down to the economic realities of what work is commissioned.
Yeah.
And being able to demonstrate third-party credibility is incredibly powerful for having your work commissioned.
Yeah.
So it has a future-looking piece that's really exciting as well, in terms of, okay, well, if we've got this recognition, we've gathered more trust, that's going to translate into more potential to move the dial in the future. And from the cultural perspective, which of course is harder to measure, is one of the themes we really saw in Eurobest this year, I think, that we haven't touched on yet, was around market disruption.
Right.
And B2B being way more courageous in terms of market disruption. But again, that takes confidence in the team and in the agency to deliver disruption, with that being creative and constructive and not destructive.
Yeah.
And that really, to get that signed off, relies on trust and being able to think about how we take an old problem and we take a new approach to it, rather than just a rinse and repeat. Particularly in B2B, the rinse and repeat feels safer. Winning work, that credibility gives you more latitude, I think, to be more creative in the future.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great starting or jumping off point for the next campaigns or the next set of work that you want to do. I know people can be critical of awards, but I actually think all the things you've talked about are great reasons for people to engage and enter awards. And actually the agency client relationship as well, I think strengthens, build and strengthen those relationships.
Absolutely. I think that for agencies, obviously there's a huge business development angle to do award-winning work, and the amount of excitement and engagement right across the market has an incredible ripple effect. But because of marketing's historic challenge with really delivering strong ROI metrics to organizations, for the client side, it's hugely bolstering to the credibility of the in-house team. So it absolutely is a symbiotic benefit from the agency and from the client side. Yeah, and regardless of the award, the morale is disproportionately huge. But the exercise, to your point, is a really positive one in saying, wait a minute, what worked here? This really works. What do we think about? And because I think when you're putting a campaign together and getting it into market, you're just running to hit the next hurdle, running to hit the next milestone and deadline. And the submission process forces you to take a step back and pull together the holistic storytelling in 2 minutes of what you wanted to achieve, how you went about doing it, how it landed in market, or what the results were, in a way that is a really helpful reminder exactly. And none of this happened by accident.
Yeah. I did one recently, and we pulled the case together, and it was on reading the case, and I kind of then shared it with a load of people who'd worked on it and saying, look, just actually read this and remember, like, it was incredible work. And it ultimately didn't win an award, but that didn't matter, because that moment of actually just reflection was quite galvanizing for people. I did want to ask you, we're at that horrible point of the year where we're thinking about next year. And so then it gets into predictions and all that kind of stuff. When you're thinking into next year, I guess, what are some of the things that are top of mind for you in terms of, I guess, challenges and opportunities in B2B marketing?
In terms of, what to expect in 2025, the piece that I took away from Eurobest this year and from Cannes this year also is just the breadth of talent in B2B has absolutely mushroomed. And you're thinking about winning at Cannes this year, entries from Turkey, from France, from Sweden, from Norway, all got bronzes. Norway got their first bronze. Italy got their first silver. We're seeing a real kind of Europe as a hub of creative B2B rather than as an outpost.
Brilliant.
Which I think is super exciting. One of the things that I'm definitely going to be looking out for, and that really struck me this year, particularly versus other years, is that when I was first at Cannes in 2022, there was some work with really beautiful craft, but not a ton.
Right.
And probably craft would have been the one area where I really sort of felt we're still, as a category, not on an individual campaign level, some way behind some of that most beautiful work that you see, and you think, oh my goodness, the craft of it is just incredible. But definitely in B2B, I'm seeing sort of way more campaigns where craft was really elevating the execution of a campaign in a way that I hadn't seen before. And I'm really looking forward to that, just that little green shoot, just really kind of blossoming, because I think that it's a personal thing. Like, there's lots of different elements. Ask me this question any day of the week and I'll change the answer. But right now, I'm huge on craft. And I think that's probably because in terms of where I envy work
Right.
as a B2B marketer, it's typically that, oh my goodness, the craft of that was exquisite. We wouldn't do that with it. So seeing the real maturity of craft in B2B is something that I think in 2025 is going to be really exciting.
I love that. I love the idea of craft, and it's really interesting in the moment we're at, and I talk a lot about it online in my newsletter, on this podcast, is, the impact of AI and, what impact that is and is currently having on our industry. I think it's the biggest disruption, in the last 20 years that we have and will see. But actually that point about craft is really interesting, and where that kind of is an intersection of human and technology. The craft is still the human piece. I still think there is craft in creating the AI outputs. So it's just very interesting. It's a lovely word to use, actually, I think, in the discussion.
Yes. I think AI has just become a little bit buzzword bingo for me at the moment. I think a lot of people use it, don't really know what they mean by it. And I think the reality is they're scared about AI taking their jobs, which I get. But I think that the reality is, AI is not going to take your job. Someone who understands AI better than you might take your job. But there's still a lot of ambiguity that we don't really understand in AI at the moment around, particularly, I think, around intellectual property. I think it's incredibly powerful, potentially.
Yeah.
And obviously, but there's also, to some extent, been around in different guises for a very long time. So yeah, I'm afraid I've gone craft over AI in terms of the big trend for me.
Brilliant. Well, listen, it'll be because there is so much AI noise and
Absolutely, yeah.
I think it's lovely to get the word craft in there, and I think it's a very important thing for us to have and think about as we go into 2025, because 2025 will be an even bigger year for AI with craft, and so I love that. I love that as a kind of a look forward to 2025. And Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to join me to talk about. But I said at the start, something I really love, B2B marketing, and I'm delighted that you're seeing the path that it's on, and kind of the talent that's coming in to B2B marketing, and having people like you leading the way and kind of shining the light and supporting it by being on these judging panels. It takes a lot of work, and so that commitment that you have to kind of elevating the craft of B2B marketing is brilliant, and we need people like you doing what you're doing. So I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Conor, so much. I've had a blast. So much appreciated.
Thanks a million. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Sarah. Yes, I did tell you there was going to be some great advice about how to think about your award entries. It's something that I have certainly seen when I've been on both sides of either writing or reading award entries, and really understanding that metric and why the metric matters, I think, is really, really important. So great tip there for you. Of course, myself and Sarah had a great conversation about lots of the challenges that we all face in B2B marketing. And I'm sure a lot of you were nodding your heads as Sarah was talking about some of the issues that we all face in B2B marketing. I think what's reassuring is that we're all facing very similar issues and challenges, and that together, collectively, by talking about these challenges, we can find ways and explore ways to overcome them. That was great with Sarah giving so much of her insight and advice. Well, that is it for today's episode. Of course, if you have enjoyed today's episode, please do feel free to share it with your friends, your family, your relatives, whoever you think might enjoy this episode. And if you could take a few seconds and give a rating or review, it really does help other people discover today's episode. And of course, if you subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, you will never miss an episode of That's What I Call Marketing again. That is a guarantee. We will be back next Tuesday with another new episode of That's What I Call Marketing, so do stay tuned for that. But until then, from me, your host, Conor Byrne, thanks so much for tuning in. Take care.
If you would like to reach an engaged community of marketing leaders, get in touch with That's What I Call Marketing to discuss sponsorship opportunities.